Hi, Dorri and Michelle, and welcome to everyone who's joined us. I'm Susan Noyes, the founder of Make It Better Media Group, which includes Better, Marin, Spaces, magazines, and the Make It Better Foundation. We're honored that you have joined us today for this fireside chat to learn leadership lessons from these two transformational CEOs, Dorri McWhorter of the YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago and Michelle Boone of the Poetry Foundation. Please send any questions or comments that you have for them through the chat at any time. We will try to address all of them. But also, Better will post a video of this conversation in our Make It Better TV and on our YouTube channel. We'll also publish an article summarizing their top line advice on better.net. Send these out to everyone who had signed up for this virtual event and as an article in one of our upcoming Better Letter email newsletters. Dorri and Michelle will each tell you their career stories and share advice before we move to the actual questions and answers. Again, please send any thoughts you have or questions through the chat at any time in order to join the conversation too. First up is Michelle Boone. Michelle is, as I said before, the president of the Poetry Foundation, which is based in Chicago, Illinois. Appointed in May 2021, she is the first woman and the first African American to lead this institution. Before, she was the commissioner of the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, and then the chief program and civic engagement officer at Navy Pier, which is an historic landmark and one of the top cultural destinations in the Midwest. Her professional career includes work in television, film, and the recording industries. Intriguingly, she served as a United States Peace Corps volunteer in Chad, Africa, in the 90s. She also serves on many cultural arts boards, and she volunteers for the South Shore Works, which is a community-led collective working to improve the quality of life in her South Shore neighborhood. She's won multiple awards from Indiana University as one of their distinguished alums and for her civic service in Chicago. In her Poetry Foundation role, though, Michelle now is poised to create impact on national and international stages too. So here's Michelle.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Susan, for that really gracious introduction. And hi, Dorri. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you here today. I'm really excited for this opportunity from what I'm going to be able to learn from Dorri and how to help me in my new role here at the Poetry Foundation. My background is one that I always say it's kind of a bit of a roller coaster. I have not had a straight path in my career. It's been one of ups, downs, and turns and twists, but it all has some relevancy to get me here. I was born in Chicago, but I really consider Gary, Indiana, my home. That's where my formative years were. My parents moved to Gary when I was in junior high, and it was great to kind of have an opportunity to kind of slow down the pace of city life and move to Indiana. I went to college at Indiana University, and it was there where I really began to think about how I would figure out what I would do in the world. How would I earn a living? What path would I choose for my profession? And for me, it was really a process of elimination. I hated science, so I wasn't going to be a doctor. I thought about law school, but that meant 3 more years of school, and I was quite anxious to get out into the world. And the thought of adding on more time in school was kind of out. I considered even being a teacher, and one of my mom's best friends was a school teacher, and she said, "Oh, honey, whatever you do, don't go into education." So that was out. But I knew I always loved being around creative people and artists. I didn't necessarily have talent, but I said there's got to be a way to be supportive to those folks and position myself to be around them. Indiana University had a fantastic theater department as well as a great telecommunications radio TV department. And so I earned my bachelor's degree in telecommunications. And when I graduated, moved back to Chicago and began working for NBC, Channel 5, and subsequently worked at all 3 of the local networks here as a television engineer. And it was great. And the great thing about doing something like that is that you really learn how to be a team player. That my contributions, whether it was on camera or supporting audio or graphic design, was about really supporting that show. And all of the pieces had to work well together on time. And you had to really be on top of things because it was live TV. But that was really my first introduction into what it means to be a team player and to be a support player. From TV, as Susan mentioned, I then landed in the record industry. You know, at the time that I was in the television business, it was going through a lot of change. And so there were a lot of buyouts. You know, I started at ABC. ABC got bought up by Capital Cities, there'd be layoffs. I go to NBC, they got bought up by somebody, you know, so ended up in the record business. And that was another opportunity to really expand skills. I started out in sales. I used to go to these things called record stores and do point of purchase sale and meet with the salespeople, really try and promote your product, which were records, by artists that happened to be on the roster of the label. From sales, I ended up in promotions where I would travel throughout the Midwest. I was the Midwest Regional Promotions Manager for some boutique labels through the Capital family, and had a chance to travel throughout the major cities of the Midwest. Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, even Buffalo, New York. So it was pretty expansive, but it really gave me a sense of these different urban centers and communities, really had my finger on the pulse of what was happening with pop culture, which came in handy later when I went to the Joyce Foundation as the Midwest or senior program officer for arts and culture. And because Joyce was a regional foundation, I found myself back into these same cities that I had visited doing record promotions. From there to invited to serve as commissioner under Mayor Rahm Emanuel for the city's Department of Cultural Affairs, Navy Pier, and now here at the Poetry Foundation. And while each one of those experiences has been very different, there is this thread that they've always been creative fields. I find that even when I've been in senior roles, I consider myself to be a team player and to be a means of support for the entire operation. How do I position myself so that I can help advance the work of others? And I think that's something that very initial foundation from television and being a support player, working together with a team for the greater good, for what we're putting out publicly, has really been, I think, a real strong tenet for me in terms of leadership, that it's not about me being out front, but how do I position myself to be the foundation and a support system for the broader team and for the work that we're trying to elevate and do.
I love that as a leadership tip. Number one, you're not leading from above, you're leading from a support position. How do you empower everyone else to do their best work? Did I hear that right?
You did hear that right. I mean, I'm actually, even though people that know me might find this to be shocking, but I'm really kind of a shy person. I come from a big family. I'm a middle child. And so I find that I operate best kind of back in the background and very observant. And so it's from that position of assessing all of what's going on around me, trying to figure out, okay, where can I find my way? And where do I fit in? And it's also maybe stems from a lack of confidence early on, and not being so sure about decisions or my role or my place. And so stepping back and letting others shine and finding a way to help them do that has probably been a big part of it too.
So I just heard something else I think is really important, and that is you just admitted you felt a lack of confidence early on. My guess is every person starting out on an ambitious career feels similarly. How did you build that confidence? And then I promise that we're going to go to Dorri.
I can talk about Michelle all day. I'm good.
No.
Keep
I
going.
want to hear from you.
I love your story. Keep going.
I guess the way that I learned to have more confidence was surrounding myself by people who I admired or people who I thought were smarter than I am, and turning to them for advice, and turning to them even for approval at some level, and getting kind of the thumbs up from them saying, "No, you're doing the right thing," or "Hey, that's great." And so if I felt that they were smarter, if they were people that I aspired to be like, and they endorsed the path that I was taking, if they said, "No, this is great, keep going," that gave me more confidence than to move forward with whatever decision I was trying to make.
Okay, so you just keep giving one more pearl in your answers. Surround yourself with people that you think are smarter than you are, or whose work you really admire. That's excellent leadership too. But now I want to give Dorri her turn to tell her story. And Dorri describes herself as a socially conscious international business leader dedicated to improving the world by leveraging experience from the corporate and nonprofit sectors. For 8 years, she served as the CEO of the YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago. And during those 8 years, she grew the annual operating budget from $10.5 million to $38 million. That's right, fourfold growth in only 8 years. Last August, she was recruited to become the CEO of the YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago, where she is poised to be a great innovator for much needed change too. Dorri also is a CPA. She serves on many boards, won the 2019 Chicago Innovation Award, has appeared on Better's annual Black Women of Impact list multiple times, and participated as a panelist at our 2018 Family Foundations event. And spoiler alert, she is featured on our 2022 Most Powerful Women in Chicago list, which will be published this May. That's the only public announcement of anyone on that list. Dorri is beloved as a mentor too. She joins us to share her story and her best advice for others who are on the rise as change agents, making the world a better place for others too. Your story.
Well, first of all, thank you for that intro. And when you talk about the different lists, I'm like, really, Susan, really? Because we know that there's plenty of so many fabulous women in Chicago. And I'm, of course, on the panel with the fabulous Michelle. Michelle, it was so great to hear your story and see you and be with you today. It's so funny, though, as I listen to your story, I'm almost the exact opposite because I'm so not the creative. In fact, I actually wanted to be an accountant because I loved math. And knew that I wanted to be an accountant at a very early age. So there's this story, and I'll talk about it at some point, but where I wrote a letter to Santa asking my parents if I could be their accountant, because like you, Michelle, I also was born in Chicago, but I was raised on the other side. So you got Indiana covered, I got Wisconsin covered. And so, had the chance to go to University of Wisconsin-Madison. What's interesting though, while I majored in accounting there, I also took all of my electives outside the School of Business and in African-American Studies. And so it was fascinating, but I'm also an accountant, realize that I can't get a degree. I literally did the math. I'm like, yeah, I can stay and finish my degree in African-American Studies, or I can go leave and make money. And so that's what I decided to do before I completed that degree. It was only one more semester, but I had it at that point with school. But I say that because I'll come back to, as I, made the change to go from the corporate life to nonprofit, people didn't know that was actually in me all along. So it was just a reconciliation at that point, not so much a new endeavor. But having said that, so I started my career in the late 1900s and worked at Arthur Andersen out of school, and really just followed a very, what I would consider a traditional corporate career in terms of going through public accounting and then going to management consulting as well. So I actually took a lot of different twists and turns in terms of the experience. So had I mentioned started Arthur Andersen, went to Booz Allen Hamilton along the way and did management consulting, and still very proud of the fact that I was on the team and at Booz Allen at the time when they modernized the IRS. And I'm like, if you can modernize the IRS, you can do anything in the world. And so really helped build confidence as to, the pursuits that I would later take in business as well. So had an opportunity as Andersen actually fell, as we know, particularly being in Chicago, lots of people and companies actually got started as they went into different directions. And so I followed a couple partners that had left Andersen and gone over to Crowe Horwath, or Crowe Chiswick at the time, actually, to start one of their new practices. And so have had an opportunity to, I mentioned the work that I did at Booz Allen Hamilton was major change initiatives. And even, going to Crowe at the time that I did was right as Andersen had fallen and Sarbanes-Oxley, lots of regulatory, just a changing regulatory environment. So I've always felt like I've had the opportunity to be in big change spaces and really being a part of teams and managing projects to create big change. And so, as I actually went to Crowe and ultimately decided to leave Crowe when I was a partner at the firm, a lot of that was that, me wanting to make more change. And then that space would be the world, right? So I'm like, if I could change the IRS, I could change the world, right? And so part of what I wanted to do was also work in the change sector. So it wasn't necessarily about even working for nonprofits, which we talk about a lot, but for me, it was really, how do I work in the business of making the world a better place? And at the time that I chose to go to the YWCA, well, not chose to go, I threw my name in the hat and was fortunate that they selected me as the CEO at the time. It was really about, how do I go to a business that's really focused on fulfilling its mission, which is what's for the YWCA at the time, it was eliminating racism and empowering women. I'm like, yeah, that's the business that I want to do. And so approached it from that standpoint of, how do I create a better business platform to actually create the change that we want to see. And so, as Susan mentioned, had done that for the last 8 years. And then now coming to the YMCA for the past 8 months, really focused on, here's this 164-year-old agency, which is amazing in its own right, because business, nonprofit, whatever, there are very few organizations that are over 100 years old. And what can we do given where we are today and what that looks like? And so I'm really excited to take all the background that I have, yes, and from a corporate perspective, having an MBA, all of that type of stuff, and apply it to yet another type of business that, to me, the outcome of that is, if we do our work well, then we improve Chicago at a minimum. And because I think Chicago is the center of the universe, we ultimately improve the world too. So I'm just excited to be able to get to do this work, and just leveraging off of the wonderful experience I had at the YW to be able to continue to look at ways that we can improve the work that we do here at the YMCA to create a better Chicago and ultimately a better world.
That's fantastic. I love hearing you say how you wanted to change the world. And I guess the difference, back to this confidence issue, for me, it wasn't so much about even imagining being a change agent for the world, but when I worked in entertainment, if you will, the private sector for the arts, I didn't feel good about my work. And the switch to, and I didn't really have an awareness about what nonprofit meant. I just knew I wanted to feel good about my work. I wanted to be proud in the way that I earned a paycheck. And I wasn't quite feeling that going in the radio stations, working a Paula Abdul record.
Paula got me through.
No shade to Paula Abdul, but I said, there's got to be a better way. And so it was really difficult, back to this thing about mentors and the importance of having smarter people than you around you. It was hard to talk to people to say, I'm not really feeling fulfilled with this job, because on the outside, it looks like, oh my God, you have this fabulous job. It's so cool. And you're hanging out and, and it was like, but there's got to be a little bit more. And so I was really looking for purpose and a connection to mission. And I really didn't know what that meant, which is in part what drove me to Peace Corps. But then after the Peace Corps experience, really becoming more aware that you can influence the world and you can do good and earn a living. And that's what really got me on the path. But I love that idea of just the confidence in saying, I'm going to go out here and change the world.
Yeah. And, when we talked about confidence earlier, and I thought about, what you asked Susan earlier about, where does the confidence come from? And I started to reflect on that myself. And, I really do think for me, it came from being with a father who was like, yeah, nobody's better than you, but you're no better than anybody. Right. And so this humbling effect. And then, and I'm sure you've seen this out throughout your career too, Michelle, you're around a lot of people and you're like, they really don't know what they're doing. And so if they don't know, and I don't know either, I'm sure one of us is going to figure it out. Why not be me, right? And so that really, I don't even, I always say it's not actually that I have confidence. I'm just not afraid to mess up more than the next guy. so I don't know what I'm like.
So advice is fake it till you make it.
No, advice is fake it till you make it. And advice is actually in this, and I'm sorry I didn't mention this earlier, from an advice perspective, the advice that is like really do you, because no one knows what they're doing. Like nobody. And so you might as well do you, because the one thing you do know is hopefully you can continue to understand who you are. So you might as well bet on yourself. And so my advice, and even in my, my 20s, my first advice would have been, don't follow the boy to Atlanta. But since I did that, I already did that. I'm going to tell you to really show up in your authenticity, because everyone's struggling to figure it out. So you might as well be authentically yourself as much as possible. So, yeah.
Okay, I love that. And let's stay with that theme. What other advice would you give your younger selves?
I would give myself, the advice I'd give myself is give myself the grace to fail or to try new things. Don't be so afraid. Everything is not life or death. That give yourself the grace and the time to make mistakes. It's okay. Learn from them and then move on. And not to be afraid to try new things. Be bold, be brave. It's okay.
Yeah, and I would double click on that, Michelle. Like that to me has been absolutely advice. I actually don't call them mistakes, because I've told everybody I don't make mistakes, but I do have unplanned learning opportunities all the time, right? And so, but I'm with you, right? It's just like learn from it, because that's what life is about. And I sit here now, knocking on 50 and say, oh, just live life and figure it out as you go. But it took me a while to do that. So if I can fast forward that advice, I would absolutely say just be, just try, right? You really can't fail, because it's life. You just figure it out.
And doesn't the world need people who aren't afraid to just try more than ever?
Absolutely. Just the very nature of growth, whether that's, business growth, professional growth, personal growth, whatever growth looks like, it means you've never been there before, because you're growing to a new place, a new perspective that you've never seen. So yeah, right.
Yeah, and you find that it comes in handy actually when you're in positions like these, right? When you come in the door and you ask questions, well, why is it done that way? And if someone says, well, we've always done it that way, that's not a reason to continue, right? That we have to be bold and try new things. Well, let's try this. We've never done that before. That's okay. And if it doesn't work, okay, then we retool, refresh, and try something else. But there's no risk, there's no shame in trying new things, no matter at what level you're at.
I feel like transformation, and disruptive transformation, like that's the thing now. So staying stuck in, well, we've always done it that way, is probably the surest, the fastest route toward failure in the long run. But there are other, these are complicated times. COVID, as we talked a little bit about the social justice, and it's increasingly important. Could you talk about being a leader in these times around those issues and everything that has to do with internet and disruption and all the other complications?
Well, it's been really interesting for me coming into this role in the middle of the pandemic. I've never been in a leadership position where everybody was working remote. And even that dynamic of remote work was a new phenomenon for everybody at lots of different levels. And so it was recognizing the trauma that people have gone through at a personal level, at the family level, the isolation that some of this may have brought, and just the trauma of change. And so it was even more important to make the extra effort for building relationships. Communication became so critical, and connecting with people, because it's all like this, right? Through the screen. And so you don't have the benefit of getting to know people around the water cooler or casual bump ins at the copy machine. You really had to make an effort, which meant you had to schedule the time to connect with people. And so connections to me were even more important than ever, even more so than, what the work mandate or the directives might be. It was giving the reassurance to people that, I got you, we're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. This is who I am. How do they get to know me? How do they get to know me as a person before they even get to know me as a leader when you have this distance because of the pandemic? We're about to return back to the building, to our office next week in a hybrid form. And for the most part, everybody's really excited to, there are people who have never been in the office before that have been hired over the last 2 years. So we don't know each other. We haven't been around each other. And that's exciting. So, to be almost one year into the job and to have this new layer of excitement about going to work is really refreshing. And I'm looking forward to it next week, just to have the actual in-person connection with people that I've been working with for the past year is something to really look forward to.
Dorri, you might be going through something similar with the YMCA. Are you transitioning to a less remote environment?
Well, a couple things. One, mostly because when you think about the different YMCA facilities, they have been open for some time. And so, of course, when they were mandated to be closed during the height of the pandemic, being that the services and the nature of the services were primarily fitness centers, they were part of the closing, right? And so, but what that did, I keep saying that what we saw 10 years worth of change in the last 2 years, right? So there was already this sort of slow decline that the YMCA was experiencing. And then COVID just was it took off just expedited and accelerated the decline that we saw. So now I'm coming in, I've been here 8 months. So the height of COVID happened and the destruction, from an organization perspective happened. And now we're on which is where I like to play anyway, now we're on okay, how do we rebuild this, right? What will this look like now? What do we have to do to make it a better place, right? And so, it's given us an opportunity to come in and do this. So while, our centers have been operating, but the world has changed around them, right? And everything that you mentioned, Michelle, the trauma that people, and we see it and I see it in our staff, I see it in our members and the people that are coming through our facilities. I get incident reports for the organization and you literally are seeing people lose their mind all across the city through just me looking at the incident reports. And so it just really gives us an opportunity to really figure out who we need to be as an organization to the communities that we are in and what that's going to look like. And, as far as our staff, relative to at least our metro office, so the corporate office, we're slowly coming back in. But the fact of the matter is that our centers have continued to operate, and a lot of us go and still participate in the centers and making sure that they have what they need to get through these times as well. But it really has, these last couple years have absolutely shined a light on all the things that we know we have to address as a country even more. And a lot of that is making itself highly visible in our different centers based on the geographies that we have as well. So it's definitely an interesting time.
I liked the way you talked about, we have the opportunity to think about rebuilding and how do we make it better in the process. So starting from a great perspective there. And it seems to me that mental health is a higher priority than ever. So can you speak a little bit about how you will infuse? I'm assuming that you're going to infuse mental health.
Well, and we already have, right? We saw it in the youth that we serve. Unfortunately, we saw a lot more reporting of suicidal ideation. And so we've started to integrate more of the behavioral health specialists into our different areas of work. But I'm also seeing it across adults where, people have their coping mechanisms, right, during COVID have changed or I won't say changed or haven't had to understand that level of coping and what that looks like. And so I think that we've all experienced so much trauma, isolation, all of those things during this time, which is why we're going to need Michelle and the work that she's doing at the Poetry Foundation even more, because culture matters for us, right? Culture is often part of that healing process that so many of us need, and being exposed to arts and culture in different ways. So I just, from my perspective, I'm taking this all in and understanding what are the connection points that we have to address the range of needs that we're seeing across both adults and youth.
That's a lovely segue to Michelle and poetry in particular, because people turn to poetry when times are tough. And my guess is she has big plans.
Well, I mean, just in general, I also serve on the board of Arts Alliance Illinois, and it was, in many ways, the pandemic was great in really demonstrating to people who weren't necessarily culturalists or would think of themselves as arts patrons, that shutdown of the world really revealed to people how important access to the arts are for your mental health, for your well-being, for your children, for your spirit, for your soul. And so the way that arts organizations were able to kind of pivot and make their work accessible, museums making their collections available online, performance companies, making performances available through YouTube. Our subscription rates at the Poetry Foundation for our magazine Poetry, went through the roof because people were looking for answers. People were looking for a way to find answers to what was happening, what they were feeling. And nothing does that better than poetry. It also was a big win for us when, that shortly after the world fell in love with Amanda Gorman and reignited their interest with poetry, we had to shut down. So all of these things were kind of a confluence of opportunities for the foundation to really solidify its relevancy in the cultural realm. And not just the foundation, but poetry at large. It's something you get introduced to in school and maybe you break away from as an adult. But we found that people were really looking to the expressions of poetry, the beauty of poetry as a way to give meaning to what was happening in the world, meaning to what they were feeling, how others could express exactly what they were going through a few beautiful words together.
So I think you gave a good answer to a question that we've seen in the chat, but I want to say it one more time to see if it stimulates anything else. Please speak about the importance of the arts and their role in facilitating creative expressions, connecting community, and needed healing. And then I'd also like to add on, and in terms of mentoring others or being as a leader using poetry or the cultural arts. Could you please address that?
Well, I think about like the turbulence of what was happening with George Floyd or the expressions of public displeasure. It was the arts, murals that were painted on the streets to be in solidarity with what was happening around the issues of inequities, police brutality with George Floyd. It was the expression that we heard through song as people were putting down on paper and using music and lyrics as a way to collectively share what they were experiencing. For me, it was very, very interesting, moving, fulfilling for me to find myself at a poetry organization in that moment and to have access to this archive of poets and writers and resources to help me just process on my own what I was thinking, to be able to communicate to my family and friends in ways that I couldn't say, and to point them to, here's something to look at that helped me get through this moment. What do you think about this? And so, I had this a set of friends where we were exchanging poems that we were reading with each other. Hey, did you check this out? What do you think about this? And that would stimulate another conversation about another angle of what was happening. So I can't imagine a life without art, and especially during a time like this, because, and I know there are many mothers out there who probably couldn't imagine getting through this time with their kids as they were schooling at home and not having access to some of the art resources to keep their kids occupied, stimulate their creativity, give them an outlet because they couldn't go outside. They couldn't interact with each other. So it really was the arts that I think in many ways saved families, saved kids, and it certainly did a lot for me personally.
Dorri?
Which aspect of that's like, that was a lot.
That was really a lot. And I didn't, it actually got me thinking, what resources are there that you recommend for someone who wants to, I want to go find poetry that might get me thinking, that might heal me. I want to find creative opportunities for my kids. And by the way, I know the YMCA can help with that. So I'm happy to give our advice, our audience, your advice on where to find resources to help them grow in this field.
So I think Michelle could probably more specifically speak to some of the resources relative to the arts and culture world. I will say, though, what the Y has to offer, part of what we're trying to do is make sure that our centers become a place of belonging for the communities that we're in. And so regardless of zip code, regardless of age, income, any of the qualifiers, so to speak, we just want to make sure that we're accessible to people so that they can come. Clearly, we have the opportunities, which Michelle, we might have to partner on. We have opportunities to do, some of the creative arts. We offer programming around arts within our centers, but we don't necessarily, we partner with others to provide those types of programs, because of course we believe that that's an important expression that we want to see happening in our center, and we want to really be able to provide that space for people to be able to do that as well. And so I just think that we have an opportunity to not only create that space of belonging, but really ensure that we're understanding what the community is experiencing and how we are really responsive to what those needs may be. I'm really excited that one of the things that we actually have a partnership at our McCormick YMCA, that we do a 606 arts program there for people for youth and adults to work. It's actually part of our one element of our youth safety and violence prevention for the youth to express themselves through that particular program. But then also, one of the things that we were able to do we started this year in January, that in our little village, our Rauner YMCA, we actually made our memberships free. And so we did that to make sure that people had a place that they feel like they could reemerge or emerge, coming from just all the experiences that folks were having during the pandemic as well. So my goal is to make our spaces accessible and to ensure that, we bring the type that folks want to see within those spaces too.
Yeah, I love what you said about partnerships, because one of the goals here is to take poetry to the people and not just wait for them to come to us.
Nice.
I mean, we have a really robust website, but how do we think about new, creative, innovative ways to get poetry out, take poetry to the people and meet them where they are?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we're going to see unfold over the next, couple of years moving forward, is the innovation that many of the arts had to take on to adapt to what was happening with the pandemic. And so innovation is going to be key. I mean, even for us, the way that we delivered our programs, we had to shift from in-person programming to online programming. What we learned was that, wow, that opened up new audiences for us. We were able to connect with people in Australia, in Ireland, in ways that we would not have ever been able to do with just in-person programming. And so moving forward, we're not going to abandon those audiences. It's like, okay, so how do we continue to build on that, grow those audiences? Yes, we can move back to in-person programming, but what can we do to even expand more our way to access the work through these new digital mediums? So innovation, I think, is going to be really key.
Collaboration and innovation are are words that make the Make It Better media world hard to sing. And we love telling the stories about those and helping point those resources online to others to inspire others to do the same thing. So if something develops here, we want to be part of sharing that story and growing the connections as much as possible too.
Awesome.
I would love to go back to the leadership tips and the mentoring, which was the primary topic, and find out who were your mentors or the leaders that really inspired you when you were young.
Okay, I know it's going to sound cheesy, but for me, it was two grandmothers, probably early mentors and leaders. One of my paternal grandmother, she was, an entrepreneur before I even knew what the word was. She had a travel agency. She had a coffee shop. She sold real estate. I mean, she was just always doing something. And I think that example of a woman having businesses and doing her thing, and not dependent at all on, my grandfather, but really, making her moves, was probably the first example of seeing like, okay, yeah, women work, women do their thing, and that's okay. So that was probably the first introduction. And then in college, there was a professor, Dr. Portia Maltzby, who I'm still friendly with now. She was one of the founders of African American at the African American Institute at Indiana University, and she launched a program, the Soul Review, the IU Soul Review, which is actually going to have its 50th anniversary coming up. But she was a young woman from actually the University of Wisconsin, an ethnomusicologist, and she started this program because of her love of Black music. But in turn, starting this program created so many jobs for young African-American students at IU. I was one of them. I did like the video work. I was a lighting designer, but there were many of, and all of the performers in the ensemble, actually, these were like their jobs. And so it was the first time I saw a young woman, a young Black woman with a PhD, working in a university, starting a program that had this ripple effect. And so to see in action, like an idea come to life and then have this impact on so many people, was a great example for me to see, and really opened up the possibilities that, oh yeah, maybe it's possible I could do something like that. Not necessarily following in the same path of getting a PhD and starting a music program, but that young Black women can be empowered to do what they want to do and be successful. So those were like two critical examples of mentors or in leadership roles for me.
Those are fabulous examples. I'd love to have met your grandmother.
Yeah, and I would say for me, on the mentor side, it's interesting because I always felt, particularly being, a person in accounting, whether it's a Black woman in accounting or woman in accounting, my mentors were, I would say, earlier in my career, probably mostly men from a mentor perspective, but definitely from an inspiration perspective, and who I look to for inspiration. Where I mentioned. And I would have to say my mother too, from just a pure inspiration in terms of how to be a good human, and then I look to other ways to apply that. So I mentioned, my father and just his perspective on, doing you and being humble while you're doing it. He worked in a factory, and so he was always, he would always say, Dorri, those people, they don't know one better than you. And so he would just really like pump me up, right, and make sure that, that I was prepared to go sit in the meetings and or sit at the table when I thought I didn't belong at the table, right? So he was the one that really did that. And then my mom for me, and really my dad had just such a great perspective on treating everybody. And this is partially the way I've developed a perspective that everyone has value, because regardless of who you were, my daddy treated you with the utmost respect. And I just really appreciated learning and seeing him treat everyone so kind and like they mattered, right? And so that to me was something I took away from him. And my mom has just an incredible wit and humor about her, regardless of the situation. I'm just like, okay, but I learned that you have to bring joy into everything that you do from her. And so, from me, it was really that humility and the valuing of others, and then the joy that you bring to whatever you do, that I really learned and took from my parents in terms of their mentorship. And then from a pure inspiration side, I've always been a huge fan of Christine Lagarde. And I say that because on the professional side, you didn't see women I started paying attention to her more when she was Minister of Finance for France. And you just didn't see women, first of all, wear over the knee boots to meetings with a bunch of men. I was like, she killing it. She dresses like a woman, right? She's unapologetically a woman. And in those spaces, because, being in large accounting firms, I knew that when she was the head of Baker and McKenzie, which is a large law firm, international large law firm, that didn't happen. And so I knew what she had to have experienced. And so she was actually someone that was really inspiring to me. Only met her once and almost cried in the process, but just because she always, as a professional, right, she was at the top of her craft and stayed there. And now, being the president of the European Central Bank, our equivalent of a federal reserve, right? So I just know from a professional standpoint as a woman how difficult that is, and particularly in any space in finance and law, and so in any of these professional services. So she's always been someone that I found professionally inspiring to me, to show up, deliver that, brilliance and intellect with over the knee boots. You got my approval every time.
I like you're saying that it's not just about the mentors, but also the inspiration.
Yeah.
And I will say there have been a couple of people who provided some inspiration about what not to do. And so the negative examples that might have been presented to me from a couple of folks who were like horrible bosses, right? And it's like, oh, okay. So what I'm learning from this is what not to do when I get in that position. And those in many ways were just as powerful lessons for me as some of the more positive reinforcement examples in the mentors that I had, but also mining, some pretty awful experiences about what not to do as examples of what not to be and what not to do in the future.
Absolutely.
So we heard bring joy to the job, dress for success, and own it and enjoy it. And Michelle, without violating any competences or naming someone and throwing them under the bus, could you give us an example, at least one, what not to do as a boss?
I think there was a trend maybe in the 80s of, I love what you said about, Christine dressing like a woman. And I think there were some women bosses that I had who maybe felt like they had to overcompensate and be tougher than the guys in a really abusive way. And so not acknowledging gains or successes or wins of the team versus like trying to hammer down everything you did wrong or where you failed, belittling people. And just, because that, I guess maybe those were the examples that they had, right? That's what the guys were doing. That's what the men were doing. And so you begin to emulate that behavior that you see versus saying, no, I'm going to reject that. And so not going the same, when you have bad examples, you don't have to do that. You don't have to emulate and replicate what you see. You have to have, again, the confidence to say, no, I'm going to try something different. We're going to do this a different way. And I think I can get more out of people through positive reinforcement and setting a positive example.
Yeah, perfect. All right, we have another comment, really. From Lisa Gaines McDonald, who says she attended.
Hi, Lisa. I know Lisa.
Oh, there you go. She attended a book club discussion last week on The Age of Phyllis by Jeffers at the Poetry Foundation. The group was national, international, and diverse. Jeffers delivered Phyllis Wheatley's voice with topics that are relevant today. Thank you. A perfect example, though, of a local, national, and international opportunity.
Yeah, and again, that's what we learned from, having to be innovative and how to deliver programs that when you don't have access to the physical space, when people can't come to you, it's taking the work to them. And the digital world has allowed us to do that. So thanks for coming out, Lisa. We're back in the building next week. Come on out. We hope to see you here, but also we'll continue to look for you online.
And thanks for attending this talk and sharing your voice with us, Lisa. First of all, I need to correct something, and Dorri gently gave me a gentle reminder. Better was delighted to feature Michelle in our Black Women of Impact list this year. And so that's one of the reasons you're here. The other is, full disclosure, I am a Poetry Foundation trustee and excited to see the vision and determination that Michelle is bringing to her role. And I want to circle back, though. I talked about Dorri participating in other events with Better, and at the Family Foundation's event, she offered a quote that has really stayed with us. Sometimes it's appropriate to give a person a fish. Sometimes you need to teach them to fish. And sometimes you just need to change the fishing industry. How do you know which is which? When to do what?
Yeah, and so in all transparency, I stole that. My friend, Jessica Sarowitz, who's, really making a mark, I think, in the world of philanthropy as well, from the Julian Grace Foundation. She said that to me one time when I was just, because I'm kind of a revolutionize the fishing industry kind of gal. And she was helping me understand that you really have to do all of these things, right? That it is better to give people, at the time, it's better to give people a fish to teach them or revolutionize the fishing industry. And so for me, it really is about understanding that environment and understanding the context, because you can't force a revolution on folks who ain't ready to be revolutionized either, right? And so to me, how do you know is really recognizing where people are and really meeting them where they are, right? And if people are receptive to receiving a fish, let's do that, right? And when they're receptive to learning more, we can do that too. So for me, it really is about wanting to recognize and understand where people are if we're going to create the change that we need, right? It's not one way or the other. And I had approached this work because I was ready to change the world, right? So I was like, let's go. This world needs to get turned upside down. And I was like, oh, okay, we're not turning today. So I had to really take a step back and understand what is it that people need and how do I meet them where they are based on how they want to engage in this process. And so for me, how do you know is you talk to the people and you work with the people that, and don't assume that, clearly you have the answers to everything. You may have a perspective, but there's other perspectives out there, right? And so how do you ensure that ultimately what you do is most representative of the perspectives that will actually, experience the impact as well. So for me, it's just understanding more and taking that time to understand as well.
Yeah, as you were asking the question, Susan, and then listening to Dorri, I mean, my father was a fisherman, and he was a fly fisherman. And the thing to be successful was about where you throw the cast, and knowing where to hit it, right? And so if you've got the bait, doesn't mean anything if you don't cast it right. And so for me, it's about, it's all of those three things, but also knowing where to fly your cast, and take what you have out to where it's going to be received, where you have the biggest chance for people to nibble, take a bite of what you're offering. And so you got to teach people how to fish, how to cast in the first place. But you also got to have the goods, right, for the fish to respond to that. So it's knowing the pond that you're in, making sure that you have the right equipment, and being adaptable and being flexible, and understanding and being able to read a situation and when it's best to do one of the three. I don't think it's one or two or three.
Yep.
It might be one and two and three, and maybe another.
So now let's look forward. You both are sitting in really powerful roles with and listening well and understanding, starting to understand what might be needed to grow your impact or your organization's impact to make the world a better place. What industries or spaces do you hope to transform? At 10 years from now, if you were still in this role, where do you see change coming as you are teaching a whole new way to fish in whatever the space is that you get to affect?
That's a big question. Right now, I'm more focused on internal healing. We've got a lot of work to do. Again, it's the recovery from what's happened over the last 2 years with the pandemic. And so making sure that the people we are entrusting to deliver on this work are well, are healthy, sound, and have clarity of purpose, right? And that we're all on the same page with the mission. And so I think, when we get back into the building, it's kind of like dating, right? We're going to have to get to know one another again and pick up on each other's vibes. I really want to solidify the infrastructure internally and make sure that the right systems of change or systems at large are in place. Do we have the right tools? Are we healthy? Do we have the right foundation in place to really honor and live up to the ambition of the mission before we get too far out there? And I'm big on starting at the home base first and then building out the concentric circles of trust, support, and connection. And so if we don't have it together here first, we can't expect that others are going to want to be attracted to the light that we're trying to shine on poetry. And so let's get our house in order. Let's make sure we're healthy and sound. And then the light that emanates from our team, the light that emanates from the work will begin to attract others in.
You will. 10 years from now, it'll be very big concentric circles.
Yes.
Dorri, how about you?
Yeah, I would say, I got to remember I'm an accountant by my core. I'm qualifying my comments. Part of what I want to do is, I love the name of your company with Better, Susan, because I want the why to be an example of how we can do business better, meaning that, as I mentioned before, our business is to improve communities. That is the core of what we do and who we are. But I do think that part of what we're seeing with whether, it's the social unrest that we talk about and the just the state that we're in from the pandemic, that I hope that we all walk away recognizing that all these workplaces, regardless of what we label them, call them, name them, industry sector, whatever, that it's spaces where humanity shows up. And we really, Michelle so eloquently described how she's focusing on her people first. I want everybody to do that, right? So what I hope that, I could use the why as a platform is to demonstrate how you create a business that you really are focused on your people first. And if you focus on your people, you help others create better people as well, right? Or better experiences for people. And so my hope is that, we really start leaning and listening to the people and understanding the humanity that shows up in our four walls. And, whether they call it the Great Resignation, like, call it what you want. It's people saying, we need change in every space we sit in. And so all of us have an opportunity, regardless of what that platform is, to recognize the humanity that's there, therefore make it better for those people, regardless of where they sit.
I love spaces where humanity shows up. I hope 10 years from now.
They call it work. They call it work, but whatever.
We are about to be out of time. 2 more minutes. And given the charge I gave you to talk about your favorite poem or line of poetry, we might run a little bit over. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we end with some poems?
Well, I don't know how the audience feels, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Susan, for pulling this together and to get reconnected to my great friend, Dorri McWhorter, and to hear more about the work that she's doing with the YMCA. So this has been a real joy and treasure and treat for me. So thank you just for the opportunity.
You're so welcome. It's been a joy and a treat for me, and it will be a joy and a treat for our audience.
Yeah, and ditto. I was looking for, Michelle was spitting all that knowledge. I was writing it down. I dropped my pen. I'm like, where'd my pen go? I can't find my pen. I dropped it. So I was like, ooh, that's another good one. That's what I like about Zoom panels. You can do that.
and the good news is there's going to be a wonderful article summarizing all these good points coming out in case you didn't capture every word.
Good.
I asked each of you to end with a favorite poem or line of poetry. If you don't mind, though, I'd like to go first. And it's actually a shout out to Poetry Magazine. The Poetry Foundation does produce a monthly magazine, Poetry Magazine. And I found one in this month's March 2022's called Through the Varied Pattern Lace. It's by Margaret Danner. And it's about 15 lines. Greeting from a Baha'i. I salute the divinity in you. As I look into each different face, I am exalted. I am exalted to recognize his grace shimmering through the varied patterned lace. There is God's good in every man, whether Russian, French, Italian, or America, and glowing so in you, O Igbo, Yoruba, Zulu, Congolese, Ban. I look at you and feel it flooding me. Divinity must win the race. It will not be halted. We are all small sons of one clan. I am exalted.
I love that you read the poem of Margaret Danner. This month's issue is really dedicated to her. Margaret Danner was a little known African-American woman editor at the Poetry magazine back in the 50s. And our guest editor this month really wanted to shine a light on the contributions of Margaret because she's really a forgotten hero and made a real huge impact in Chicago culturally, not just through her poetry and her editorship, but also she was a big collector of art as well. So real quick for me, my poem was, it's an oldie but a goodie, and one that was really impactful to me growing up in the 70s by Nikki Giovanni called Ego Trippin'. It's much, much longer, but the end of the work, again, back to this whole theme about confidence for me. This was a poem that was all about being a confident Black woman. And so the last few stanzas, I sew diamonds in my backyard. My bowels deliver uranium. The filings from my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my hair thinned and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal. I cannot be comprehended except by permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird in the sky.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yes.
And so I suck at poetry. However, Maya Angelou is of course, one of my favorite poets. So what I want to do is share a quote by her that absolutely is something, I love it so much that I actually had it put onto the walls at the YMCA.
Oh, great.
And so the quote says, if one is lucky, a solitary fantasy can totally transform 1 million realities. So that is my absolute favorite quote. And that is just, for me, just such a reminder that we all matter. And it only takes one of us to literally change the world. So that's my quote from a poet.
There you go.
Okay, and a perfect way to end a powerful conversation. Thank you so much. I am leaving enthused for the future. For your institutions and for the world, given the good work that you are undertaking right now. Thank you for joining us. If anyone has any questions or for follow-up, you can send it to us. And otherwise, we'll be sending this wonderful content out to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.